The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back. Canna Chat. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and last week's guest is this week's new permanent co-host. I'd like to welcome to the airwaves on a permanent basis, Ryan Miller. How are you, sir?
I'm doing terrific. Thank you so much for inviting me, Ralph, and I'm glad to contribute however I can.
Oh, well, the way you can contribute is just by being you, and that should do it. We got to know the work you did last week, the work you do on behalf of veterans of the armed forces. The group you are executive director of is called Operation EVAC, and basically it's educating veterans about cannabis. What could be a more rewarding life, Ryan?
No, you're exactly right. I'm really grateful for this path and purpose. And so,
okay, well, let's go way back and get to know you, and maybe you can get to know me. We can talk, and maybe the audience can get to know me a little bit as well. How did you come to cannabis initially?
Well, that was probably about 15 years old. And,
all right. Tell us about it.
Yeah. Cutting class at Arroyo High School. I would go, and me and some friends would go to, Bancroft in Oakland and, find some medicine. And at the time, it was terrific for social anxiety for me. And so, I didn't use it while I was in the military. I actually had to use a drink to help me pass the entrance screening.
Okay, Ryan, I think we're breaking up a little bit. Are you not speaking directly into the phone, or am I not getting you?
Thank you. Is that any better?
Yeah, that's better. Okay. Speak into the phone.
Let me run that back.
You're at Arroyo. You go for your medication. You didn't call it that then. We didn't go. You called it copping a hit, copping a high. But basically, what it was, you were putting a filter up on the world a little bit. At least I was. I'm speaking for myself. Right. And we didn't think of it as medication, but it really was. It was medication for the head. You're going through a rough time. Age 15, you're certainly not an adult, but you're certainly not a kid in the traditional way of looking at things. How did it help you?
For me, it really helped specifically with social anxiety. I didn't really have a lot of self-esteem, a lot of confidence growing up in my youth, and the cannabis was a great way for me to make friends, really. Some of my best friends were cannabis consumers, and I think cannabis sort of has a nature of inclusivity to it. Folks are always attracted to it. The circle always gets a little wider when people are consuming it in public, because, it does bring communities together. It creates community. And so that's what it did for me, was basically integrate.
Okay, well, you and I, we were both very young when we went into our respective branches of the service. Now, I'm quite a bit older than you, so when I went in, there was no testing for it. There was no really an awareness of it. I would, in the walk-in closet in my room in the barracks, I would go in, close the door, get as high as a kite, and drive off to junior college in the morning, and do just fine.
Yep.
But I was among the very, very few who this is back in 1966, before the Summer of Love was a few years away, but it helped get me by and helped get me through the Air Force and what I was going through. How did you deal with it in the military?
That's a really good question, and I wish I would have had the same access that you did during my service. So while I was enlisted in the Marine Corps, I never consumed cannabis. However, I did consume a whole lot of beer and liquor. And those consumption choices inevitably led to some decision-making that was not conducive to a long-term military career. I got in trouble. I had multiple alcohol-related incidents, including underage drinking, including a DUI on base in Okinawa. And so for me, my long-term advocacy goal is safe access to cannabis for active duty troops. For me, if I had access to herb instead of alcohol, I might still be in the military. I might not have made behavior choices that compromise that career path.
But can you see it from a I'm looking back. When I was in the military, I could see nothing from a military point of view from their perspective. But looking back, could you even now see it as from their standpoint as a deterrent for what they want? Do they want independent thinkers? Do they want people who look inside their own head, or do they want a lot of yes men and women who will obey orders and not think about them?
Right.
So I think the only way that you're going to get military personnel to indulge in either eating, smoking, lotions, the sobs, however one ingests marijuana, they're going to have to be a scofflaw. They're going to have to come up with some sort of test mask, so when they're given tests for it, that they're not going to be found out. I think it would be easier to develop a test than it would be to change the military's mindset of not wanting folks who are just going to say, wait a minute, that's a good question, Sarge. Glad you brought that up. Let's talk about it, kind of thing.
Very good points that you bring up. And I understand there may have been a study in the 30s about cannabis use in the military, and they found that there was no lack of discipline, right, or compromises in discipline due to cannabis use. And really, I met the Commandant of the Marine Corps last fall when I was in Washington, D.C., and I asked him to imagine how different his Monday morning would be as a commander if his troops were smoking herb instead of drinking alcohol on the weekends. And he got it. Of course, he's in a position where he can't really encourage me, but he wasn't necessarily discouraging me either. And, any commander in the military knows that alcohol is the leading, factor in, off-duty incidents. And so I don't.
Is this gentleman pictured with you on Facebook on your profile picture?
Yes, sir. Look for the 8 stars.
Oh, okay. Then I'm going to take that picture and put it up on the website. We have a show page on the website for Canna Chat, and I'm going to put that picture up there. That's beautiful. I'm glad you got that reaction. And did he in any way say that it would be he indicated it would be a better world for him personally, but did he ever say that it has a chance of going?
Well, he didn't verbalize anything, but 90% of communication is nonverbal. And just with his body language, I could indicate that definitely it's something that is interesting, right? Whatever commanders can do to reduce the impact of alcohol on our troops, I think is worthy to look at. And the military, specifically the Marine Corps, has a heritage of alcoholism. And if it's something that we seriously want to consider improving upon, then we have to seriously consider cannabis as a harm reduction substitute.
Well, the same could be said in life, and you're absolutely right. It would be a better world for all. Just health-wise, the effects of alcohol on people's long-term health is noticeable. Noticeable in their obituary, in their early obituary, in many cases, and just in their demeanor, in the world they live in, and taking it to the road is the most horrible mistake. Now, that said, taking anything that changes your consciousness to the road is a horrible mistake. But I just want to cry out for a second. There have been a rash of alcohol-related deaths in the Bay Area. 3 deaths or severe injuries. 3 highway patrolmen have been run over by drunk drivers recently. And you know what? If there was some marijuana mixed in, that's not what got these guys hurt or killed. It isn't marijuana. Certainly, it doesn't help the situation if you're mixing marijuana and alcohol. But let's face it, the culprit is alcohol. And to bring marijuana up and to scare folks, especially now that it is legal in California, they seem to be doing whatever it takes, what with phony news stories, scaring folks about tainted pot, grown with pesticides. No. If anything, legalization has encouraged laboratory testing to prevent to prevent consumption of tainted goods. So the news media is of course, their advertisers are beer companies, alcohol companies, cotton, timber companies, all the folks who have been lobbying to keep it illegal for so long are getting to the media by withholding advertising if they're not supported with stories that are detrimental to the consumption of marijuana. I see that on a regular basis. It's only been 3 weeks, but there's definitely a slant by the media to scare the hell out of people. That's my opinion.
Sure.
Do you see that?
Sure. I mean, the media is a powerful force. For me, I'm not convinced that cannabis impairs driving. So I'm excited about the dedication of research funding that's going to study that factor here in California. Because for me, just in my experience as a consumer commuter, I believe that it's helped my driving. It's helped me avoid road rage, right? Helped me relax and focus on the road and better avoid distractions. So for me, I'm not so convinced that cannabis causes hazards at all on the roadways, and I'm excited about the new research that should reveal that.
Okay. Tell me about a fun experience you had with marijuana when you were a kid.
I would say probably some of the best times, right? For us, it was often cutting class, and going to Oakland and procuring some product. And then there's a whole kind of ritual, I think, to it of, breaking it down, rolling it up, lighting it up, passing it around, and the conversations and the laughters that would often align with that activity. And so for me, it was often the best times. It was where I made new friends. It was where me and my friends engaged in conversations that were intellectually maybe a little deeper and a little wider than what we would have otherwise. And so really it was the best times, I would say, growing up as in my youth were around cannabis use. And then just in contrast, some of the worst times of my youth were alcohol-related incidents. So I'm really glad that you asked that question because it just invited me to be reflective and, just the best times of my youth, I would say.
Okay. What do you see in the immediate future for the military in terms of this? Because what with legalization, there has to be, I would say, between the Army and the Air Force, there has to be 25 bases in California. Army, Marines, Air Force, 25 bases. To say nothing of the ports with the Navy and the Coast Guard and what have you. So it's impossible. When I was in the Air Force, they would put on the bulletin board places that you could stay away from. They ordered you to stay away from. In bars in San Francisco, this is in the 60s, they didn't want you to go to be exposed to anything bad. So naturally, those of us who were so inclined would go there directly. They saved us a lot of trouble. They printed out a list of places we could go for a good time. Well, the fact is that anymore, the military could put every place in the world. It's legal now. Where are you going to go? How are we going to stop you? Do you think there's a possibility that they will, just as they've done, change the rules on transgender people, on gay people, this, that, and the other thing? You think it'll come to it?
Absolutely. I think it's only a matter of time. And I think that with Proposition 64 in California, California is the 6th largest economy in the world. And so the momentum in terms of national normalization has really gotten a lot more behind it now with California. So, yes, I agree. It's only a matter of time. The military is becoming more progressive, like you mentioned, with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. And so I also believe that it'll be a recruiting and retention requirement to flex these laws because they won't find enough candidates, right? I understand that the military is already having a tough time finding computer hackers that could pass a urinalysis. So it's only a matter of time, and I'm excited to contribute.
And the FBI also is at a quandary because the great computer programmers just happen to all smoke marijuana. And they're having a hell of a time recruiting for the FBI. So things they are changing. Can you give me some idea what you think is going through Jeff Sessions' head at this moment regarding all of this?
Yeah, that's tough to speculate. I think that his generation and just his kind of narrow mindset sort of grasps to any sort of control that they can. And so, it's really hard to speculate what's going through his head. He's a well-known racist, so I try not to go down those paths too much myself. But also I think that, with California and Colorado and Washington and everyone, pushing back, there's probably some concern from his perspective.
Okay, I think we're fortunate enough that he's got more on his plate to deal with in today's world. And I think given the crumbling of the administration, we're going to be okay along those lines. That's my prediction.
I hope you're right, and I agree with you.
All right. Address for me for a second. We're in the East Bay in Northern California. Address big business and the cannabis industry coming in and basically ruining it for small-time growers, small-time dealers, small-time clubs, small-time dispensaries. Could you address that if you would?
Well, sure. Just ain't that America, right? Isn't that just the nature of capitalism, corporatization? And so really I think that we shouldn't be so surprised that corporatization is occurring within cannabis, because that's basically what this country is founded upon. I was very encouraged with the postponement of the Level 5 mega licenses that was proposed with Proposition 64, and that was a huge point that I advocated around in support of Prop 64. And then I was very disappointed, along with a lot of small-time farmers, when those Level 5 mega licenses were ultimately approved for immediate release by the governor. So it's a concern, right? And I encourage folks that share that concern to use this opportunity to organize, advocate, speak truth to power, act as agents of change, right? Use this perception of injustice or corruption to fuel energy towards positive activities, like getting involved in civic engagement, right? This is a malleable, pliable law, and the voice of the community is really important to shaping it. So I just invite anyone that's concerned with the corporatization of cannabis to really get involved. Get involved at your city council, your state assemblyman's office, your national senators and representatives. Get involved in effect.
Who are our allies on a statewide basis?
In terms of what specifically?
In terms of modifying Proposition 64 to the point where it's fair, for instance.
Well, that's a good question, and I can mention the California Compassion Coalition, which Operation has joined with Sweet Leaf, who gives terminally ill patients in San Francisco complimentary compassionate cannabis, the Caladrius Network, who works all throughout California giving sick children compassionate cannabis, the Oakland chapter of the Weed for Warriors, who gives also veterans compassionate cannabis, the East Bay Cannabis Community, who looks after seniors and low-income folks. And so we're forming this California Compassion Coalition to focus on what our priorities are with restoring and preserving the culture of compassion in California cannabis. So the large mega licenses, that isn't really our priority at the moment. For folks that is their priority, I encourage them to form alliances, form coalitions, and use the civic engagement process to affect change.
Okay. In case I forget to ask you, Ryan, would you be good enough to send me links to these organizations so I could put them up on the page on our website, the show page on our website?
Absolutely.
Beautiful. And people can go to that and links to those organizations. Good show as usual, Ryan. You're incredibly informative, and we're going to bring in guests over the next coming weeks and months, and we're going to have roundtables and discussions and talk about the causes of the day and what's going on, and with the whole idea to try to make it a better world. How's that for simplicity?
I love it. I really appreciate those intentions, and appreciate being included in the conversation.
Beautiful. You are an integral part of it. Welcome to the network. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ralph. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
All right, we will. And for those of you who enjoy this offering or any of our offerings on the network, I invite you to package up some lightly used children's books and bring them to the Head Start program in whatever community you live in. Kids need to read, they need to develop a passion, and they certainly need to get their noses out of the devices and the games once in a while and become school ready. So if you do that for me, that would be great. And come back next week. We'll be here, and it's Canna Chat in the Zone, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tyko. Adios, everybody. Thanks again, Ryan.
Peace.
Peace and out.